A $5,000 luxury hotel bill flashed on my phone just as Preston, my husband, lectured me about wasting money on health insurance. He looked down at me with pure disdain and said, "My parents think you are a financial burden, and honestly, I agree." I did not cry. I simply smiled. He had no idea that tonight his parents would finally meet the actual drain on our finances, and it certainly was not me. My name is Audrey, and until 10 minutes ago, I thought my biggest problem was the headache throbbing behind my eyes. I had just walked through the front door after a 14-hour shift at Sterling and Hightower, finally closing the massive waterfront redevelopment project that had consumed my life for 6 months. My shoulders ached, my feet were blistered, and all I wanted was a glass of the Pinot Noir I had picked up on the way home. Instead, I found Preston sprawled on the beige sectional I had paid for, his eyes glued to the television screen as he mashed buttons on a controller. He was wearing a brand new designer tracksuit that I knew for a fact retailed for $600. It still had that crisp, store-bought sheen. He did not even look up when I dropped my keys on the console table. "You bought alcohol again," he said, his voice flat. He finally paused the game and turned to look at me, his gaze landing disapprovingly on the paper bag in my hand. "It is just a bottle of wine. Preston, it cost $40. We are celebrating." He stood up, shaking his head with a theatrical sigh that made my stomach turn. $40, Audrey. Do you have any concept of financial responsibility? You throw money away on useless things while I am trying to build a future for us. I stared at him. The man had not held a job in 2 years. His entrepreneurial ventures were nothing more than half-baked ideas that drained our savings. Yet here he was, lecturing me on a $40 bottle of wine while wearing a $600 outfit. "I pay the mortgage, the bills, and for the food in that fridge," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I think I can afford a drink." "See, that is exactly the attitude I am talking about," Preston snapped, walking over to the kitchen island to lean against it, crossing his arms. "You are out of control." "I have been thinking, and this needs to stop. We need to separate our finances. Clearly, you cannot be trusted to manage the household budget. From now on, you transfer 70% of your salary to the joint account. I will manage the investments and the savings. You can keep the scraps for your hobbies." I blinked, genuinely unsure if he was joking. 70% Preston, that is insane. He stepped closer, his expression hardening into a look of pity that was far more infuriating than anger. "You just don't get it, do you? My parents think you are a burden? And honestly, I agree. They told me last week that you are holding me back. They said a woman like you is not worthy of my potential." The room went silent. I felt a cold shock wash over me, but it was not the sting of rejection. It was the clarity of a lie. Robert and Deborah Hawthorne adored me. They called me every Sunday. They sent me flowers on my birthday. They treated me like the daughter they never had. Preston was lying. He was using his parents as a weapon to beat me into submission. He continued, pacing the floor now. "Look at Dave's wife, or Mike's. They know their place. They support their husband's visions. They do not come home and wave receipts in their faces. They are grateful." "Why can't you be more like them?" I was about to retort when his phone, which was lying face down on the marble counter, lit up. The vibration buzzed against the stone. I glanced down. A message notification flashed on the lock screen. "Miss you, baby. Did you transfer?" The message vanished as the screen went dark again, but the damage was done. The pieces clicked together with the precision of an architectural blueprint. The new clothes, the demand for control over the money, the gaslighting. I looked at Preston. He was waiting for me to cry, to apologize, to beg for his forgiveness, as I had done so many times before when he made me feel small, but the tears did not come. Instead, a switch flipped inside my brain. "Okay," I said softly. Preston blinked, thrown off balance. What I said, "Okay." I repeated, my voice gaining strength. You are right. We should separate our finances. Completely. Effective immediately. We split everything down the middle. My money is mine. Your money is yours, and the housework, 50-50, starting right now. A smug grin spread across his face. He thought he had won. He thought he had bullied me into handing over the keys to the kingdom. Finally. I am glad you are starting to see reason, Audrey. It is for your own good. He stretched his arms over his head, yawning. God, I am exhausted from dealing with your drama. I am going to take a shower. He turned and walked toward the master bathroom, the very bathroom I had spent 2 hours scrubbing on my hands and knees last Saturday while he slept in. I listened to the door click shut and the sound of the water running. I did not move for a long moment. Then, I walked over to the windows and pulled the curtains shut, plunging the living room into semi-darkness. I sat down on the couch, opened my laptop, and the blue light of the screen illuminated my face. I logged into our online banking portal. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I accessed the transaction history for the last 3 years. The spreadsheet I opened was blank, but it would not be for long. I was not a burden. I was the bank, and the bank was about to audit the books. The blue light of my laptop screen was the only illumination in the living room as I initiated the download. I exported 3 years of transaction history from the Platinum credit card I had foolishly given Preston for emergency household expenses. The progress bar crawled across the screen, and when the file finally opened, it was not just a spreadsheet. It was a confession. I created a new Excel file and named it with a grim sense of satisfaction. The Real Burden. XLSX. My fingers moved instinctively. Utilizing the same analytical skills I used to audit multi-million-dollar construction budgets at Sterling and Hightower, I began to categorize the data, creating pivot tables that stripped away the lies and left only the cold, hard numbers. The categories filled up with sickening speed: 5-star dining, luxury retail, travel, and miscellaneous cash withdrawals. I spotted a pattern almost immediately. Every time Preston had claimed to be attending an intensive investment seminar in Miami or New York, the credit card showed charges at romantic boutique hotels. The dates aligned perfectly. The charges were never for conference halls or business lunches. They were for room service, spa treatments, and champagne at 2 a.m. But the real smoking gun was Venmo. Preston, in his arrogance, had forgotten to set his transaction history to private. I cross-referenced the dates of the cash withdrawals with his Venmo activity. There it was, repeating over and over again, payments to a user named Kylie. The memos were insultingly transparent. Nails. Uber. And the most damning one of all, rent. I switched tabs to Instagram and typed in the handle. Kylie was 22 years old, a self-proclaimed influencer whose feed was a collage of bikini photos and brunch platters. I scrolled through her posts until I found a photo of her posing on a familiar velvet sofa. It was in an apartment building in the Seaport District, a building I knew well because I had designed the lobby. The rent there was astronomical. I ran the final calculation. The sum at the bottom of the spreadsheet made me blink. $150,000. In the last 2 years, Preston had funneled $150,000 of my money into a 22-year-old stranger, while he had contributed exactly $0 to our actual home. I sat back, the glow of the screen reflecting in my eyes. I did not feel heartbreak. I felt the cold, clinical detachment of a surgeon preparing to cut out a tumor. Heavy footsteps descended the stairs. Preston walked into the kitchen, scratching his stomach. He opened the refrigerator, the light spilling out onto the dark floor, and stood there for a long moment before slamming the door shut. "Babe, there is no almond milk," he called out, his voice laced with irritation. I told you specifically that I needed it for my smoothie in the morning. I did not look up from my screen. That falls under your 50%. Preston, if you want almond milk, go buy it. He stormed into the living room, his face flushing red. Are you serious right now? You are going to be petty about milk. I am trying to build an empire here, and you are acting like a child. He stopped himself, taking a deep breath. I could see the gears turning in his head. He remembered that he needed me. Look, he said, softening his tone into that fake, oily charm I had once mistaken for affection. Let's not fight. My parents are coming for dinner next weekend. This is huge. Audrey, they need to see that we are doing well. That I am doing well. I need you to organize a dinner party. Something high-end. Show them we are thriving. He paused, looking at me expectantly. Once this investment deal closes, I will have plenty of cash. I will pay you back for the party. I promise. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the desperation behind his eyes, the pathetic need for validation from the parents he claimed despised me. Okay, I said, closing my laptop with a soft click. I will organize the dinner. It will be unforgettable. Great, Preston said, relieved. Make sure the menu is impressive. I smiled in the darkness. Oh, do not worry. Preston, the menu will be exactly what you deserve. The first morning of what I liked to call Operation Reality Check began with a silence that was deafeningly loud. For the past 3 years, the smell of freshly ground Colombian roast coffee had served as Preston's alarm clock. Today, the kitchen smelled only of lemon floor cleaner and stale air. I sat at the kitchen island, dressed in a sharp blazer and sipping a latte I had purchased from the artisanal cafe down the street. Preston shuffled in, eyes bleary, hair sticking up in tufts. He reached for the coffee pot, but his hand grasped only empty air. He blinked, looking at the pristine, cold machine like it was an alien artifact. Where is the coffee? He grumbled, his voice thick with sleep. I had mine already, I said, not looking up from my tablet. The beans are in the pantry. The grinder is on the counter. Good luck. He scowled and started banging around the cupboards. I watched over the rim of my cup as he poured whole beans directly into the filter basket without grinding them, then jammed the glass carafe under the spout with aggressive force. There was a sickening crunch. The $700 tempered glass carafe shattered into a dozen jagged pieces. Damn it, Preston yelled, jumping back as shards scattered across the floor. This machine is a piece of junk. Why did you buy this garbage user error? I murmured, turning the page on my screen. You can clean that up. I am heading to work. By the time I returned home that evening, the house felt vibrationally different. Usually, the living room would be thumping with the sounds of gunfire and explosions from his video games. Today, it was silent. Preston stormed out of the hallway the moment I walked in. He looked like a man on the edge of a nervous breakdown. The internet is down, he shouted, waving his controller in the air. I have been trying to log in for 6 hours. I called the company, but they wouldn't talk to me because the account is in your name. The internet is not down, I replied calmly, hanging my coat. I simply changed the password and downgraded our family plan to a single-user business line for my laptop. It was part of the budget cuts. You cut the internet. How am I supposed to stream? How am I supposed to trade crypto? I reached into my bag and pulled out a printed invoice. Here is the bill. You owe me 50% of the last month and 50% of the installation fee for the new router. That comes to $120. Transfer it to me, and I will give you the Wi-Fi password. He stared at the paper, his face turning a shade of purple I had rarely seen. I will pay you next week. I just moved some funds around for an investment this morning. I knew exactly where those funds had gone. They were currently sitting in Kylie's account, probably being spent on a new set of acrylic nails. No pay, no play, I said, walking past him, defeated. He retreated to the couch, forced to use the 4G data on his phone, but I knew his data plan was capped, and he would burn through it within an hour. The comedy of errors continued into the laundry room. Preston, having run out of clean underwear and socks, had attempted to use the washing machine for the first time in his life. He had apparently decided that hot and heavy duty were the appropriate settings for everything he owned, including his delicate fabrics. I found him holding up what used to be a creamy Italian cashmere sweater. It had shrunk so dramatically that it would now barely fit a teddy bear. "You did something to the machine," he accused, holding the tiny garment with 2 fingers. "It ruined my favorite sweater. You washed cashmere in boiling water." "Preston," I said, failing to suppress a smile. "Maybe you can give it to your future daughter. Or perhaps Kylie has a small dog." He threw the tiny sweater on the floor and stormed off. While Preston sulked in the living room, boiling water for a cup of instant noodles, the only thing he could figure out how to cook, I left again. I treated myself to a solo dinner at a French bistro downtown. I ordered the escargot and a steak frites, savoring every bite of the food that I did not have to share or justify. When I returned, I heard Preston's voice coming from the patio. He was on the phone, his tone whining and pathetic. "Mom, she is literally starving me." She turned off the heat. "She is terrorizing me mentally." "No, I can't just leave. My assets are tied up in the house." I stood in the shadows of the hallway, listening. There was a pause as he listened to the response. "What do you mean you want to hear her side?" "Mom, I am your son." He hung up aggressively. 5 minutes later, my phone pinged with an email notification. It was from Deborah Hawthorne. "Dearest Audrey, Robert and I are looking forward to dinner. However, Preston sounded very distressed on the phone just now. I know he can be dramatic, but I am worried. We have heard rumors of trouble. We will be arriving an hour early to have a clear conversation before we eat. Love, Deborah." I stared at the screen. Preston thought he was rallying the troops, but he had just invited the jury to the crime scene an hour early. "Perfect," I whispered to the empty room. "Come early." The show starts whenever the audience arrives, 3 days before the dinner party. The tension in the house snapped. I walked in to find Preston pacing the living room floor, his face a mask of sheer panic. He had tried to purchase an antique chess set for his father, a bribe, essentially, to smooth over the loan request he was planning to make, but the transaction had been declined. He spun around when he saw me, his eyes wide and wet. The anger from the previous days had evaporated, replaced by a pathetic, trembling desperation. "It was declined," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I tried to buy the gift, and the card was declined in front of the store manager. Do you know how humiliating that is?" I felt like a failure. He slumped onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. "You do not understand the pressure I am under, Audrey. Being a man, being expected to provide when the world is against you. I just want my parents to be proud of me. Is that a crime? I feel like I am drowning, and you are just watching me sink." It was a masterclass in manipulation. He was playing the victim, twisting the narrative so that his unemployment and spending habits were somehow a systemic injustice rather than personal laziness. I looked at him, and for a second, I almost felt pity. But then I remembered the spreadsheet. "I understand," I said, keeping my voice soft, almost gentle. "I will take care of it. I will unlock the funds for the party. I will handle the catering, the wine, everything. You just focus on being the charming son." The transformation was instantaneous. Preston sat up, wiped his dry eyes, and the arrogance returned as if it had never left. He smoothed his hair back and let out a sigh of relief that sounded more like a gloat. "Good," he said, nodding firmly. "That is all I asked for. A little support. I knew you would come to your senses. Just make sure the wine is vintage. Dad hates cheap blends." He walked away, whistling, believing he had manipulated me back into submission. He had no idea I was not funding a party. I was funding an execution. The next afternoon, I met a private investigator in a coffee shop 3 blocks from my office. I did not hire him for a divorce settlement. I didn't need photos to leave Preston. I needed them as centerpieces. The envelope he slid across the table was heavy. Inside were high-definition photographs of Preston and Kylie dining at the rooftop bar I paid for, kissing outside a jewelry store, and arguing on a street corner. The investigator also gave me a transcript of their recent arguments. It turned out my husband's paradise was not so perfect. Kylie was applying pressure. She wanted him to go public. She wanted a new car. I read one of the transcripts where Preston tried to placate her. Just wait until after this weekend. Baby. My parents are signing over a massive inheritance. Once that check clears, I will buy you that Mercedes. I promise. I almost laughed out loud. There was no inheritance. The only wealth in this marriage was the salary I earned, and he was promising it away before he even had access to it. Later that day, I was called into the CEO's office at Sterling and Hightower. They offered me the position of project director, a role that came with a 40% raise and a corner office. It was the pinnacle of my career. I shook hands, signed the contract, and went home to my unemployed husband without saying a word. I would not give him the satisfaction of knowing there was a bigger gold mine to dig into. That night, while Preston slept, I turned my home office into a printing press. I took the bank statements, the incriminating photos, and the chat logs, and I formatted them beautifully. I used heavy cream-colored cardstock. I bound them into elegant dark leather folders that I had embossed with gold leaf. To the untrained eye, they looked exactly like the menus of a Michelin star restaurant. I hung my dress for the evening on the back of the bedroom door. It was not the modest beige pastel dress Preston preferred me to wear to look demure. It was red, a deep, violent, blood red. It was a dress designed for a woman who was in total control. The night before the party, we were sitting in the living room when Preston's phone buzzed aggressively. He glanced at the screen and all the color drained from his face. He quickly flipped the phone over, his hand trembling slightly. "Who is it?" I asked, feigning innocence. "Just spam," he stammered, his voice tight. "Telemarketers. They are relentless." I knew it wasn't a telemarketer. It was Kylie. She had threatened to come say hello if he didn't transfer her money for the car down payment. Preston looked at me, terror swimming in his eyes, hoping I hadn't noticed his fear. "Well," I said, standing up and turning off the lights, "you should get some sleep." "Honey, tomorrow is going to be a very big day." Sunday morning arrived with a deceptive brilliance. The sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the fresh lilies I had arranged in crystal vases throughout the living room. I moved through the house with the precision of a stage manager preparing for opening night. I did not cook. Instead, a team from the city's most exclusive catering company occupied my kitchen, plating truffles and searing Wagyu beef. I wanted my hands clean for what was coming. Preston, by contrast, was unraveling. He paced the length of the hallway, wearing a suit that was slightly too tight around the waist, a testament to his idle lifestyle. The air conditioning was set to 65 degrees, yet beads of sweat had collected on his upper lip. Every time a car drove past outside, he jumped, rushing to the window to peer through the blinds. He was terrified that Kylie would make good on her threat. He stopped me near the dining room, gripping my arm a little too tightly. "Listen to me, Audrey. Tonight is crucial. When we sit down, do not bring up the finances. Do not talk about your job. Just smile, nod, and play the supportive wife. I need to talk to Dad about a new venture capital opportunity. If he thinks we are unstable, he won't sign the check." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then up into his frantic eyes. I smoothed the lapel of his jacket. "Do not worry, Preston," I said, my voice sweet and hollow. "I will say exactly what needs to be said." At 6 o'clock sharp, the heavy oak door chimed. I opened it to reveal Robert and Deborah Hawthorne. They looked every inch the Boston aristocracy Preston tried so hard to emulate. Robert wore a charcoal suit, and Deborah was draped in a silk shawl, her silver hair coiffed to perfection. But their expressions were not warm. There was a gravity to them, a tightness around the eyes that suggested this was not a social call. Mom-Dad Preston pushed past me, his voice booming with forced enthusiasm. He embraced them, launching immediately into a monologue of success. Welcome, welcome to our humble abode. I just had the landscaping redone in the back. You have to see it. And the new art in the foyer. My selection. Business has been robust. He gestured around the house. The house I paid the mortgage on, filled with furniture I had purchased as if he were the king of a castle he hadn't spent a dime to build. Deborah stepped inside, bypassing her son's theatrics. She walked straight to me. Her gaze was intense, searching my face. Preston had told me she despised me, that she thought I was dragging him down, but as she looked at me, I saw no contempt. I saw worry. I saw a mother looking for cracks in the porcelain. "Hello, Audrey," she said, taking my hands. "You look strong." "I feel strong." "Deborah," I replied. "Please, come in." We moved to the living room. I poured the wine a vintage Cabernet that cost more than Preston's first car, while Preston continued to babble nervously. "So, son," Robert interrupted, cutting through Preston's story about a fictional business trip. "How is the new office space coming along? The $50,000 I wired you last month for the lease?" "We haven't seen any photos yet." The air left the room. Preston froze, his glass halfway to his mouth. "Oh, the office," he stammered, a nervous laugh bubbling up. "Yes. Well, there were some zoning issues, typical bureaucratic red tape. We are pivoting. Actually, that is what I wanted to discuss over dinner. A pivot strategy." I handed Robert his glass, catching his eye. He took it, his jaw set hard. He knew. They both knew something was wrong, even if they didn't know the extent of it yet. We moved to the dining table. The catering staff placed the appetizers, but no one picked up a fork. The silence was thick, broken only by the aggressive vibration of Preston's phone against the mahogany table. Psst, psst, psst. Preston snatched it up, his face pale. He powered it down completely and tossed it onto the sofa in the adjacent room. "Sorry," he muttered. "Clients. They never sleep." He picked up his napkin, his hand shaking so badly the fabric trembled. Just as he opened his mouth to speak, the sound of the doorbell rang out. It echoed through the silent house like a gunshot. Preston dropped his fork. It clattered against the fine china, the noise harsh and violent. He looked at the front door, then at me. Sheer terror etched into his features. "I will get it," the housekeeper said from the kitchen doorway. "No," Preston shouted, half rising from his chair. But it was too late. She was already walking toward the entrance. Preston looked as though he had been struck by lightning. At the sound of the chime, his eyes darted frantically between me and the hallway. He made a sharp, cutting motion across his throat, a silent command for me to ignore the door. But he was powerless. I had instructed our housekeeper, Maria, hours ago that we were expecting a very specific fifth guest. Maria opened the heavy oak door, and the illusion of our respectable Sunday dinner shattered instantly. Kylie stood in the entryway, a vision of chaotic glamour that clashed violently with the understated elegance of my home. She was wearing a sequined mini dress that barely covered her thighs and stilettos that clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. She held a bottle of cheap champagne in one hand and a clutch in the other, looking around with wide, excited eyes. She clearly believed this was a celebration of Preston's success, a party she had finally been invited to join. The atmosphere in the living room did not just cool, it froze solid. Preston scrambled out of his chair, his knees knocking against the table leg. The blood drained from his face so rapidly that his skin took on a sickly, grayish hue. "You," Preston stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the girl. "You," "What are you doing here?" Kylie ignored his panic, interpreting it as surprise. She dropped her bag and ran toward him, throwing her arms around his stiff, terrified body. "Surprise!" she squealed, burying her face in his neck. "Baby, you said you would introduce me to the family today. I couldn't wait any longer. I wanted to be here for the big announcement." My in-laws, Robert and Deborah, sat in stony silence. They looked from the girl clinging to their son, then to me, and finally back to Preston. The air was so thick with tension it felt toxic. Preston shoved Kylie away with a force that sent her stumbling back into the sideboard. "Get off me!" he yelled, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak. He turned wildly to his parents, sweat pouring down his temples. "Mom, Dad, I do not know who this is. She is a client, a crazy client. She is obsessed with me. I have been trying to get a restraining order for weeks." Kylie's smile vanished, replaced by a look of confusion that quickly morphed into fury. She straightened her dress, her eyes narrowing. "Crazy!" she spat, her voice rising. "I am crazy. You were in my bed this morning. Preston, you told me you loved me before you left to come here. Liar!" Preston screamed, looking like a cornered rat. "She is delusional. Someone call the police." Kylie reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone. She tapped the screen furiously and shoved it into Robert's face. "Look at this," she demanded. "Look at the texts. Can't wait to see you, baby. My wife is such a bore. I will leave her as soon as the money clears." Is that delusional? Preston, is it throughout the chaos? I remained seated at the head of the table. I picked up my crystal wine glass, swirling the deep red liquid slowly. I took a deliberate, measured sip, letting the notes of oak and blackberry wash over my tongue. I watched the scene unfold with the detached interest of someone watching a reality television show. I did not gasp. I did not cry. I did not look away. Deborah turned her gaze from the screaming match to me. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of horror and realization. "Audrey," she whispered, her voice trembling. Do you know about this?" I lowered my glass. I set it down on the table with a sharp, resonant clink that silenced the room. Preston stopped shouting. Kylie stopped waving her phone. All eyes turned to me. "I know better than anyone." "Mom," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Please, everyone sit down. The appetizers were just a warm-up. The main event is starting now." Kylie did not leave. Instead, with the stubborn indignation of a woman who realized she was the punchline of a joke she did not understand, she dragged a heavy dining chair from the corner of the room. The legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor, a harsh sound that made Preston wince. She slammed it down next to Robert and sat, crossing her bare legs and glaring at my husband. "I am not going anywhere," Kylie announced, her voice trembling with rage. "Not until someone explains why I am suddenly a crazy client, when last night I was your future wife." Our intimate dinner for 4 had become a party of 5, and the air was so thick with tension it felt toxic. Preston looked like he was about to vomit. He wiped his forehead with a napkin, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an escape route that did not exist. Desperation took hold of him, and he did what he always did when cornered. He attacked me. "This is your fault," he snarled, turning on me with bared teeth. "You let her in. You set this up. You are trying to sabotage me." He looked at his parents, pleading for an ally. "Mom, Dad, do you see this? Do you see what I have to deal with? She is incompetent. She cannot even manage the front door, let alone a household. She lets this lunatic in to ruin our evening. She is a burden, just like I told you. She is a millstone around my neck." The room went silent. Robert and Deborah looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, their eyes fixed on their plates. Preston breathed heavily, thinking he had scored a point, thinking his gaslighting was working one last time. I set my wine glass down. I turned my head slowly to face him, locking my eyes on his. "You are right, Preston," I said softly. Preston blinked, his mouth falling open slightly. He had expected a fight, not agreement. I continued, my voice gaining a steely edge that cut through the silence. "You said your parents think I am a burden, and honestly, I agree." Preston let out a breath, a flicker of hope crossing his face. He thought I was breaking. He thought I was admitting defeat. Robert and Deborah looked up, confusion knitting their brows. "I am a burden," I said, enunciating every word with crystal clarity. "I am a burden because I have been carrying the crushing weight of your fragile ego, your massive debts, and your mistress on my back for 3 years. The color drained from Preston's face until he looked like a ghost. I turned my gaze to Kylie, who was staring at me with her mouth agape. And when I say your mistress, I mean she is a burden on my payroll too. Every date you went on, every hotel room you booked, every gift you received, I paid for it." Kylie's eyes widened. She looked at Preston, betrayal dawning on her face. "What, but?" "He said he is a real estate tycoon. He said he owns half of downtown." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "He has been unemployed for 2 years. Honey, he does not own anything. The only thing he manages is his high score on his video games." "Shut up." Preston slammed his fist on the table, making the silverware jump. "Shut up. Audrey, you are lying. You are just trying to humiliate me, am I?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. I reached under the table and pulled out the stack of heavy leather-bound folders I had prepared. They looked elegant, like the menus of the finest restaurant in the city. I stood up and walked around to the table, placing one in front of Robert, one in front of Deborah, and finally, one in front of Kylie. "I believe it is time to order," I said, sitting back down and folding my hands in my lap. "Please, take a look at the menu. I think you will find the specials tonight very enlightening." Robert opened the leather-bound book first. He adjusted his glasses, expecting to see a selection of appetizers or perhaps a wine list. Instead, he was staring at a high-resolution color pie chart printed on heavy cardstock. The title of the page was bold and unforgiving: Household Income Contribution, Fiscal Year 2024. The chart was almost entirely one color, a massive blue circle representing my contribution 100%. A non-existent sliver of red represented Preston's 0%. Robert looked up, his face pale. "Preston, you told me you were bringing in $200,000 a year consulting." Before Preston could answer, Deborah gasped. She had turned the page to a section titled Luxury Expenditures Beneficiary Kylie. She looked from the page to the handbag resting on the floor next to Kylie's chair, a limited edition designer purse with a distinct gold buckle. "This bag," Deborah said, her voice shaking. "The statement says it was purchased on the 14th of February. That is your wedding anniversary. It was bought with a supplementary card under Audrey's name, Kylie." Sensing the walls closing in, flipped open her own menu. She didn't look at the small expenses. She went straight to the asset page. Her eyes widened in horror. "The car," she whispered. "You said you bought the Mercedes for me. You said it was a gift. It is a lease," I clarified calmly from the head of the table. "Leased through a shell company Preston set up using my savings. And since I dissolved that company this morning, the repossession team is likely towing it from the driveway as we speak." "Give me that," Preston shrieked. He lunged across the table, trying to snatch the book from his father's hands. Robert moved with a speed I did not know he possessed. He shoved Preston hard in the chest, sending him tumbling back into his chair. "Sit down, I am reading this." I decided to provide the narration for the visual aids. I opened my copy and read aloud, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. Page 12, Item 4. I announced, May 12th, Four Seasons Hotel, $800. Room service and spa package, Preston. On that day, you told me you were visiting your grandmother because she had a severe flu. You even made me make soup for you to take to her. Preston shrank in his seat. Page 15. I continued, not letting up. June 20th. Venmo transfer, $2,000. Memo new nose for my baby. That is interesting because 2 days prior, you told your sister we could not loan her $500 for her daughter's braces because things were tight at the office. Robert slammed the book shut. The sound echoed like a gavel striking a podium. He turned to his son, his eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of heartbreak and fury. The $50,000, Robert said, his voice low and dangerous. The money for the office lease, the money for the new servers. You told us Audrey was spending it all on clothes. You told us she was bleeding you dry. She is, Preston cried, sweat dripping off his nose. She is manipulating the numbers. Dad, you know me. I am your son. You used my retirement money, Robert roared, standing up and shaking the table, to gamble on sports and pay for plastic surgery for a stranger. Preston turned to Kylie, his hands clasped in a pathetic plea. Baby, please, do not listen to them. She forged these. I have millions coming in next week. I swear to you. Just wait. Kylie stood up slowly. She looked at the pathetic man cowering in his chair, then at the ledger that proved he was nothing but a fraud. The adoration in her eyes had been replaced by pure, unadulterated disgust. She pulled back her hand and slapped him across the face with a force that sounded like a whip crack. Preston's head snapped to the side. Kylie grabbed her glass of red wine, the expensive vintage I had poured, and threw the contents directly onto his crisp white shirt. The dark liquid soaked in instantly, looking like a fresh chest wound. You broke loser, she spat. She grabbed my bag, technically, and stormed out of the house without looking back. The front door slammed shut, and the vibration seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. Now, only 4 of us remained at the dining table, plus Maria, who stood silently in the corner with a tray of unserved desserts, witnessing the destruction of the family she had served for years. Preston sat slumped in his chair, a pathetic figure. The red wine Kylie had thrown was soaking into his white dress shirt, spreading across his chest like a jagged, arterial wound. He stared at the tablecloth, his breathing ragged and shallow. Deborah was the first to move. She was weeping, but as I looked at her, I realized she was not crying for her son. She was crying for herself, and for the shame of what had just transpired. She stood up shakily and walked around the table to where I sat. She reached out, her hand hovering before touching my shoulder. Audrey, she said, her voice thick with tears. I am so sorry. I had no idea. He always told me you controlled the finances. He said you gave him an allowance like a child. I thought we were protecting him from you. Her apology was the spark that ignited the powder keg inside Preston. He slammed his hands onto the table and scrambled to his feet, his face twisted into a mask of ugly, defensive rage. It is all her fault, he screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. Look at her sitting there so perfect, so superior. She always looked down on me. She makes the money, and she uses it to control me. She makes me feel small. I stood up slowly. I did not need to shout. My silence had been my shield for 3 years, but my voice was now my sword. I did not make you small. Preston, I said, my tone as cold as the marble countertops he claimed to own. Your laziness made you small. Your lies made you small. You had every opportunity to build a career, to be a partner, to be a man. Instead, you chose to be a parasite. I looked him dead in the eye. This house is in my name. I paid the down payment. I paid every single mortgage installment. And this morning, while you were in the shower, the locksmith arrived. The locks have been changed. Preston blinked, the reality of his situation beginning to dawn on him. Your suitcases are packed. I continued. Maria was kind enough to stack them on the front porch. You can leave now. A sneer curled Preston's lip, a last-ditch attempt to regain control. You cannot kick me out. He scoffed, though his voice wavered. We are married. This is a marital home. Assets are split 50-50. I get half the house, half the savings, and half of your pension. That is the law. I smiled. It was the same smile I had worn when I agreed to separate our finances weeks ago. I reached into the leather folder one last time and pulled out a single, yellowing document. Do you remember this? I asked, sliding it across the table toward Robert. Robert looked down at the paper, his face, already pale, turned the color of ash. The prenuptial agreement, I said. The one you and Deborah insisted I signed 3 years ago. You were so worried that I, a struggling architect, was marrying into the prestigious Hawthorne family for money. You wanted to protect the family assets. I looked at Preston. Your father was very thorough. Clause 4B states that any assets acquired during the marriage remain the sole property of the purchaser. And Clause 7C, my personal favorite, states that in the event of proven infidelity, the offending party forfeits all claims to spousal support and shared assets. Preston looked at his father, panic rising in his throat. Dad, tell her she is wrong. Robert looked up at his son with eyes devoid of sympathy. The disappointment in his gaze was absolute. I drafted that document myself, Robert whispered, his voice sounding old and defeated. I wrote it to protect our money from her. I never imagined she would be the one making the money, and you would be the one trying to steal it. Robert closed his eyes. You have dug your own grave. Son, you signed it. It is ironclad. The fight went out of Preston instantly. The arrogance, the bluster, the rage, it all evaporated, leaving behind a terrified man-child. He did the math in his head and realized the sum was 0. He had no wife. He had no mistress. He had no home. He had no money. And now, he had no parents to bail him out. He looked at the door, then at his parents, and finally at me. His knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the floor. He crawled toward me, grabbing the hem of my red dress with his wine-stained hands. Audrey, please, he begged, tears streaming down his face. Please, I made a mistake. I was stupid, but I love you. We can fix this. Do not throw me out on the street. I have nowhere to go. Baby, please, give me one more chance. I looked down at the man who had called me a burden, now kneeling at my feet, a true burden in every sense of the word. Preston clutched the hem of my red dress, his knuckles white, his face streaked with tears and snot. I waited for the rush of vindication, the thrill of victory that usually accompanies the end of a long battle. But it did not come. Instead, I felt a sudden, overwhelming lightness. It was the sensation of dropping a heavy pack after hiking for miles uphill. I did not feel happy. I felt free. I pulled my leg back, dislodging his grip from my dress without a shred of hesitation. You were right about one thing. Preston, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the large, quiet room. I am a burden. I am far too heavy for a man with such an empty life to carry. Preston opened his mouth to beg again, but his father cut him off. Robert stepped forward, his face a mask of cold fury. He grabbed Preston by the collar of his wine-stained shirt and hauled him upward. Stand up, Robert commanded, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. Do not humiliate this family any further. Get in the car. Now! Preston stumbled, looking like a marionette whose strings had been cut. He looked at his mother, searching for a savior, but Deborah turned her back on him. She walked over to me, her eyes red but her jaw set firm. She took my hand in hers, squeezing it tightly. "I will testify for you, Audrey," she whispered, loud enough for her son to hear. "I saw everything tonight, the abuse, the infidelity, the financial fraud. Whatever you need for the divorce proceedings, you have it. I am so sorry." It was a late validation, coming years after it should have, but it was the final key I needed to lock this chapter of my life forever. "Thank you, Deborah," I said. Robert dragged Preston toward the front door. My husband, my soon-to-be ex-husband, twisted his neck to look at me one last time. His eyes were a volatile mix of hatred, regret, and terrifying realization. He looked at the luxury he was leaving, the warmth, the security, and finally, he looked at me. He realized too late that I was not the villain of his story. I was the only thing holding the roof over his head. The heavy oak door slammed shut with a finality that vibrated through the floorboards. Silence rushed back into the house, filling the void where Preston's chaotic energy had been just moments before. But this was not the tense, walking on eggshell silence I had lived with for years. This was the silence of peace. It was the silence of a sanctuary. I turned back to the dining table. It was a disaster zone. Plates of untouched food, a overturned chair, the red wine stain on the rug, and the leather dossiers scattered across the surface. My instinct, honed by years of trying to be the perfect wife, was to start cleaning. I actually reached for a napkin. Then, I stopped. I dropped the napkin on the floor. I walked over to the landline and dialed the number for a premium 24-hour cleaning service. "Yes," I said into the receiver. "I need a full crew immediately. There has been an accident. I want everything scrubbed. I want the rugs replaced. I want every trace of the mess removed." I hung up and walked to the wine cooler. I bypassed the open bottles and reached for the very back, pulling out a bottle of Cabernet I had been saving for a special occasion. It had cost me $200. I had bought it the day I got my promotion, the same promotion I had hidden from Preston. I poured a generous glass. I took out my phone. I went to my contacts. Block Preston. Block Kylie. I opened my social media apps. I navigated to my relationship status. I did not hesitate. I changed it from married to single. Then, I walked out onto the balcony. The night air of Chicago was biting and cold, whipping my hair around my face. But I did not shiver. I looked down at the city, at the grid of golden lights stretching out to the horizon. I took a long sip of the wine. It tasted like oak, dark fruit, and absolute victory. Preston had called me a burden. He was wrong. A burden is something you drag. I was the mountain he could never conquer. And the thing about mountains is that they do not need anyone to carry them. They stand alone, and they touch the sky. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Preston's karma. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Mia Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this video reach more people. See you in the next story.